TMZ just released a new documentary, UFO Revolution. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing it and giving my analysis. So this is the documentary. You can watch it for free on Tubi. There's 3 parts, 1 hour each. And why is this important in the preface here? Well, this is a major media documentary, and given everything that's going on and things happening almost every day now with this topic, a big mainstream media company like TMZ putting out a documentary like this is significant. And whoever controls the media controls the mind. So yes, we're going to be assessing the content of the documentary here and the messaging in the documentary to make some inferences about maybe there's a possible disclosure agenda behind the scenes, or if nothing else, how this will shape public perception about this topic. And I'll be, I watched the whole thing, 3 hours, still on college break here, so I had some extra time. I'm not teaching my classes now, so I was able to sit through and watch the whole thing of 3 hours in a row straight, and I only picked out the parts that jumped out to me. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you here, and I recommend you watch it yourself. So before we even get into the documentary, we got to evaluate TMZ and who they are. So first of all, we have to understand that TMZ is regarded as a tabloid, and it would make sense that the powers that be would choose to do this through TMZ, because let's say an official company like NBC or something did this, or PBS, that could have a real shock factor, where a lot of the population could just be caught by surprise. When you put it through something like TMZ that's known to be sensational or in a tabloid, people can, at the end of the day, even if they're presented with hard evidence and all of this testimony in the documentary and all of this clear logic, they can still at the end of the day go, oh, well, it's TMZ. I don't know, it's crazy. So, and that's probably what they want. But who owns TMZ? Fox Corporation, right? And who is the owner of Fox Corporation? Someone named Rupert Murdoch, who is one of the top billionaires in the world. And as Forbes said, quote, he may well be the world's most powerful media tycoon. So if you think that there isn't some kind of influence on how this information is coming out to people through someone like Rupert Murdoch, you should probably think about that a little more. And on the last bullet point here, funny enough, Fox Corporation was the company behind the movies Independence Day, Alien Resurrection, and X-Files. So there's a clear connection with Fox Corporation being active in the UFO narrative and in the public mind's perception of the UFO topic. And this documentary is going to reach a lot of people. We can deduce that by doing a little research. It's ranked number 3 in website traffic for arts and entertainment in the United States. There was 157 million website visits in December, just last month. So yeah, lots of traffic, lots of people potentially going to watch this. And here's my last point here, worth thinking about. Is it just a coincidence that 4 days before this documentary dropped, TMZ broke the Miami alien story? There's a clear connection there, and we could conjecture as to what it is. Maybe it's just to build up marketing hype around it, but it's for free on Tubi, so I don't really know about that. Perhaps it is part of a kind of plan in shaping the public mind. The Miami thing is kind of weird, kind of a little bit fear-based, a little bit like, are they coming here? Or maybe just a way to ridicule it. Who knows? Let me know if you have any ideas about this clear timing connection here with TMZ. All right, so let's keep that all in mind. And now we're going to get into the documentary itself. Now, part 1 is called The Breakthrough. And really, this is a solid overview of the facts and the context from 2017 to the present day. And they do a pretty solid job. I'll give it to them. I have here as a side note, Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal are the ones who broke that 2017 New York Times article that you see posted here, which really got the conversation pushing forward and got the government taking it seriously. But what's interesting is that if you read Paula Harris's book, Connecting the Dots, you see that Leslie Kean, according to her, originally started investigating this topic seriously because of the 2001 Disclosure Project press conference. She was one of the media people there who had an open mind, who realized there was something to this from the Stephen Greer Disclosure Conference, and then she took it seriously, according to Paula Harris. Now, Leslie Kean might have been studying it way before that, but my point being is that, again, people in the UFO community kind of take for granted the Disclosure Project's impact on this whole development. Now, going to the second bullet point, Richard Dolan comes here, and that's the guy all the way on the right. And this was the best part of the documentary, is that Richard Dolan was in it and the reasonable things that he said throughout the documentary. And, he starts it off hot, coming in with, "You've been lied to for 80 years. What else has been kept from you?" That's good. Get people thinking about it. Wake up. Wow, if this has been a secret for this long, what else is going on? And that's important. And then on the last bullet point here, they give Corbell's background story where he establishes that he talks with Grusch all the time. That's really all I have for part one. It's very basic, getting people up to speed. I think it's good in that way. If you already know a lot of it, there's not a whole lot that really jumped out at me. Now moving to part two, which is called The Truthseekers. So it kind of starts off with Jeremy Corbell having this FaceTime with David Grusch. And really this segment focuses on the David Grusch claims, but mostly on the reprisals against him, people attacking him for coming out. And there's some good Grusch quotes here. The second bullet point, quote, "I decided to do this for the good of the people who are behind the scenes that are with me on this." Interesting. Who's he talking about? Mike Herrera, who said he's working with David Grusch behind the scenes. Who else are these other people? What might we find out from them? The third bullet point, quote, "I didn't want to live in the Matrix while there's stuff like this being hidden from the world populace." Feel you, Grusch. I feel you. And there's quotes like this and so many other. If you listen to the 3-hour podcast with Joe Rogan, if you listen to Grusch speak again and again and again, he's super consistent. He comes off as just super authentic. I actually think he really just tried to be the guy to take the sacrifice and get this moving forward. Fourth bullet point down. He says, quote, "A cabal of government and industrial partners decided to have a truth embargo on reality." Again, getting to the crux of it. It's not the government hiding it. It's a cabal, a small group of powerful individuals secretively manipulating things, keeping it secret, that have people in the government, but also in private industry where it's really where the action's really at, and you're outside of laws that hold you accountable. The fifth bullet point down there, we have Tim Burchett, the congressman who's been kind of the face of pushing this in investigating it through Congress. And I have to give Burchett credit. I also think that he's genuine. You listen to his comments enough and his consistency, it seems like he is really going after this and wants the truth. So what's interesting is that early on here, Burchett alludes to the technology being the reason for secrecy. Quote, "It would put them all out of business. We wouldn't be fighting these worthless wars overseas for oil." What does that comment imply? It implies that he suspects they have the propulsion, the energy, technology, and that's what they're keeping secret. And that's why they're keeping it secret so much, because otherwise it would put the oil industry out of business overnight. Interesting quote to read between the lines there on last sub-bullet point here. He says, quote, "Billions of dollars, light years ahead," referring to his suspicion that that's what they're keeping secret, the technology. You think they wouldn't ruin your career for that? So very interesting. Now, Richard Dolan presents the story of the Admiral Wilson. If you don't know about the Admiral Wilson memo, something to read up on, but super briefly, basically Admiral Wilson back in the late 90s, because of Stephen Greer and Edgar Mitchell, the moonwalking astronaut, they went to him, they presented him with a briefing evidence saying, hey, look, this is real. Private industries are really reverse engineering this, retrieving crash UFOs. And Admiral Wilson was high up in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, very high position. And he said, I want to find out about this. This seems really legit. He went and basically was denied. Then he was showed some things, and he basically, what's his name? Eric Davis, years later, interviewed Admiral Wilson, took notes on it, where Admiral Wilson said, what I saw was not made by human hands. All right. Dolan got those notes. They have been verified according to Dolan. 100% they're real. And so he talks about that. And also on the second bullet point, it's interesting because Dolan tells us that he spoke with Edgar Mitchell. And Mitchell told him that he knew people who had hard evidence of alien bodies but would never come forward. And we have to think Edgar Mitchell went on the record saying that he believes, based on his information and insider contacts, that there is a cabal, a human group that has the UFO technology, has UFOs of their own, that those are most of what people see, and that they're doing who knows what with it for their own purposes. Edgar Mitchell, moonwalking astronaut, has gone on the record saying that. You can read that in the Disclosure book or the Unacknowledged book, which you can read for free online. And that's to my point on the last sub-bullet point there under number 2 is he probably would have shared with Dolan his belief about the man-made UFO operation. So that's why possibly I think why Richard Dolan is open to that and hasn't ruled that out like some of the others have. And onto the third bullet point, Dolan says the secrecy is like the mafia. Yeah, right. We got to remember this is probably like an organized crime thing. It's not the government. And on the last point here, he has a quote where he says, it's the reality. Get used to it. And I think this is good. This is good because this can have a sort of programming on people, but in a good way, meaning people are going to need to come to terms with this. And, we got to kind of just grow up and be open-minded and deal with our reality. So Richard Dolan, really positive impact on this documentary. They have a little segment about why are the videos so blurry. And on the second bullet point, Ralph Blumenthal says that's been part of the mystery. Why are they so blurry? We can speculate on that. It could be because the high-quality ones have been successfully suppressed and withheld. It's also these things are moving so fast. Do you really think people are going to get quality images on their phone? I don't think that's really feasible. But up to the first bullet point, one of the things I actually think Corbell made a great point at, I know I'm kind of critical of him otherwise, is he says that people denying the volume of high-level witness testimony, it's like a mental illness. And I kind of feel him on this because I've had conversations with people, very intelligent, open-minded people, and I'll present them with the best of the evidence. Just all of the high-credential people who said they saw this, who said they were aware of this, and then just to come to the conclusion that they're real, and people still just don't believe it. They still say, why wouldn't there be a video on someone's phone? And I actually agree with Corbell. I do think it's kind of like a mental illness, if we can call it that. We're just so conditioned to only believe things that the authority, the sanctioned authority figures, the government, whoever, to come out and say, yes, folks, UFOs are real, that people still will not make that decision for themselves, given the evidence. So now the documentary moves on next to the presentation of the Nazca mummies. And to me, of a whole 3 hours, this was actually the most interesting part. And we're going to get into it here. So it's kind of like a vague debunking of the Nazca mummies. Now, starts off with Ryan Graves. Ryan Graves, he is the person who's come out, and he was one of the 3 people at the congressional hearing in July who has come to represent pilots to report UFOs and UAPs. He's awesome. I really like Ryan Graves. I really think you can see how genuine and sincere he is. And he was upset that they brought those mummies out at the Mexico hearing, and that's understandable because he was not told they were going to be brought out. He's trying to be very serious about this and get people to take it seriously finally, and then they kind of threw that on him, which is sensational and is kind of would detract from people taking him and the hearing seriously. So he was upset about that, and I totally understand him. Now, looking at, are the Nazca mummies real? That's a whole nother other topic. And you have this guy on the bottom left here basically being the mouthpiece in this documentary, debunking them. But he does a bad job of debunking them. Michael P. Masters asserts that they are fake without giving any reasons or evidence. He gives no reasons, no evidence as to why they're fake. He just states it as a fact. Quote, he says, we take 3 steps forward and then 500 steps back. Is that really what's going on here? And then you have Corbell weigh in and just, quote, total BS. Okay, what are you basing that on? And then they follow that up with a montage that just ridicules it and laughs at it. And in my last sub-bullet point here, it's funny how earlier they were showing the same kind of montage of everybody laughing at the idea of UFOs, and they were showing it in a way to like, this is what's wrong with the culture, and this is dangerous that we just dismiss it. But they do the same thing with the Nazca mummies, but they're doing it in a way to actually laugh at it and debunk it. So it raised up my flag, like, why are they being hostile towards the Nazca mummies, especially when we look at the facts of it so far, which I don't have a whole lot of details. I haven't studied it, but I do know the basic facts so far. You got Gary Nolan coming on to weigh in, and he has kind of some vague views. He doesn't dismiss it or confirm it. He says, when he was approached to study them, he was, quote, intrigued. Second bullet point, he says the scientific procedure was done wrong. Now, let's think about this for a second, because this is the inconsistency that jumped out at me. If Michael P. Masters, the other guy who debunked him without any evidence, he said, quote, if you know anything about anatomy, you would know they are fake. Okay? So would Gary Nolan be so incompetent to be intrigued by something that's so obviously fake, right? Why would Gary Nolan be intrigued if they approached him with it, right? If they said, hey, we have some bodies here. We found them on the ground, underground in Peru. I doubt that alone intrigued Gary Nolan. He's been around for a while, and he's looked at a number of these. There had to be some kind of preliminary report, pictures, something to send to Gary Nolan that he received that got him intrigued. And if they're so easily written off as fake, as Masters says, if you know anything about anatomy, then why would Gary Nolan be intrigued? If they were so obviously fake, he would have just written them off. So that doesn't make sense. And on my last bullet point here, Gary Nolan's a hard one to read. I suspect that he's genuine and he really wants to bring the truth out, and he knows that there's something very real to this. I also suspect that he's been visited by some men in black suits a couple times, and there's kind of like a line that he can't cross. That's my read on him. But I like him overall, but I do think he's been compromised a little bit. That's just my opinion and judgment from hearing him speak. And then here's Michael Masters, again, debunking the Nazca mummies with no evidence. First bullet point, he says the bones don't articulate. Okay? So, but what about the number of U.S. preliminary studies that verified they were genuine skeletons? You can look those up yourself. There's apparently a whole paper on a number of universities and scientists that evaluated them and said they were real skeletons. And one I know was at University of Colorado. And so if it's so obvious that the bones don't articulate, why would these university experts have said they're real skeletons? Doesn't make sense. Second bullet point, he says matter-of-factly, grave robbers dug up ancient children bones. That's what these are. But he offers no evidence, nothing that justifies that that's true, and just states it as fact. You would think he could give us one sentence, but no, we just have to take his word for it, that grave robbers dug them up and they're ancient children bones. To me, it smells really like just a intentional debunking of the Nazca mummies, and I really ask why. Now, to one of my last points here about the Nazca mummies, because I found this segment really interesting, like reading between the lines. Would Jaime Maussan really go this far? For what? Jaime Maussan, the guy on the left there, he's the guy who brought out these mummies, and there's a whole backstory of running many years of him researching them, finding them, etc. Now, they show a clip. They show a clip in the documentary of Ryan Graves on the right there talking to Jaime Maussan, and Maussan says to him, hey, If you know anyone who wants to investigate them, the Nazca mummies, let me know. Okay? That's Ryan Graves. Now, if these are so easily proven fake, like Master says, why would Maussan welcome in high-level U.S. scrutiny? Right? Asking Ryan Graves, I mean, Graves could go to the Air Force, and the Air Force could go investigate him, for all Maussan knows. Why would he do that if they're so clearly fake? Does he just want to be a famous hoaxer? Maybe, but that wouldn't really make sense, because I would think that would be career killing. His whole career is being this journalist and investigator of UFOs and aliens, and if again he gets proven on this huge scale that they're just the fakest things, why would he want that? Doesn't make sense. Maybe there's ulterior motives. I don't know. And the last bullet point, he asked Neil deGrasse Tyson to investigate them, and he denied it. Again, why this high-profile invitations for people to look at them if they're just simple fakes? And we really see how the opinions showed here, and the words, the language is really telling of how people think about this. Here's the difference between weak sense and critical thinking about the Nazca mummies. You've got a clip from Joe Rogan that they show where he says, "Effing fake little Mexican UFO baby," hot in a hostile tone. He's angry about it, And then Jeremy Corbell, same thing, just says total BS, gives no reasons or anything. And then you have the reasonable critical thinkers on the right side here, Ryan Graves and Richard Dolan. Ryan Graves simply says, and he's the one that got them thrown on him, and that they had to be attached to him in a public way. That sucks. And even so, he says, very fair and reasonable, accurate thing. They're, quote, incredulous and unsubstantiated. He's not saying they're fake or anything. Incredulous means they're just hard to believe. And unsubstantiated, they don't have this scientific backing to put them forward like the UAP stuff does on his end to prove it that it's obviously real and true. So credit to Ryan Graves. He's a voice of reason. He is really genuine, I think, and he's doing the right thing. And clearly you can see the way he speaks about the Nazca mummies. He could have easily just been like, they're fake and I'm angry about it. But no, he stayed calm, even-keeled, says something like that. And then Richard Dolan, quote, they need to be studied independently and peer-reviewed. Yes. Don't dismiss something just because you think they're fake. That's not a valid belief. That's not a valid conclusion. All right, so, and here's my conclusions on the whole Nazca mummy thing. Because why did they focus on it so much? Why did they debunk it? Here's what I think. First bullet point. Could the ancient aliens aspect of this be a higher level of secrecy? Something that they might want to postpone, right? But they would still kind of plant the seed to condition the public gently, like, hey, this is possible. It's not real. These aren't real, but hey, get used to this idea, because in the future, maybe 5, 10, 25 years from now, you might find out that aliens were around in ancient times. And I also think that the Nazca mummies are a good kind of way to bring this out, this part of disclosure, because they're tiny. They're not threatening, so that would minimize public shock. Second bullet point, we noticed that the documentary only ridicules and debunks them, doesn't present any alternative objective views about them. And like I said, what about all those credible investigations? The Colorado University one. You could have just shown that person saying it for 30 seconds. Yeah, I studied them and I found they were real skeletons, but no. So why? We really have to ask why. And like I was kind of saying here, I believe it's to introduce it and delay this reality, possible reality of ancient aliens, because of the shock factor. And, on my last bullet point here, hey, given Grusch's blatant NHI claims, right, why would this be so hard to believe, right? If we find out, yes, there's non-human beings, why would it be so hard to believe that they weren't here a long time ago, just like we were, and that there might be remains buried? It's not as incredulous as it might seem at first. All right, so moving on from the Nazca mummies, they shift over to the alien abductions and experiencers. And Jay Christopher is probably the leading person talking on this in the upper left there. He shares his experience, which is that bigger picture there. he said there were some grays that were floating over his bed, and then they had this kind of wand, and then he just forgot everything else. Sounds a lot like the Men in Black memory eraser, doesn't it? Really interesting, and I think there is enough testimony, at least at this point, that there seems that there is technology to kind of like erase memories or suspend memory. Anyway, that was his experience that they shared. The second bullet point, there's a triangle hovering over a house video. And I thought that this was actually a really good video. You have to look at it closely, but it really does look like a massive triangle UFO just hovering over a house. I'm going to play it real quick for you here.
What is it? Be careful, be careful. What is that?
See the 3 dots?
However,
so yeah, you could check that out, but that stuck out to me from all the videos because it just looked very real and like a huge UFO. And we've heard a lot of stories about that, like the Hudson Valley UFO sightings, huge triangle boomerangs slowly hovering over houses and whatnot. Anyway, on to the third point. Richard Dolan makes the point. There's been many people having experiences, and he highlights the consistency of them all. They show a clip from Oprah. That's the guy in the upper right-hand corner, 1994. If you watch this clip, dude just seems so genuine, right? And it really seems like they're in this segment, they're really clearly preparing the public for the reality of the Close Encounters info, because there's like no debunking of it, and it's just all this really compelling footage and testimony of the Close Encounters aspect. So it seems like that's in level 1 of disclosure. If this is an agenda that's orchestrated in some degree, which I suspect that's quite possible, they are getting people ready for that to be like level 1 info. There's encounters, you know. And to my last point, they throw a twist on that because there's a clip of Gary Nolan saying, unless this is all just a major mass hallucination, and then they cut out all the music and it's super dramatic. So it's kind of like they're still trying to muddy the waters. They're still trying to get people to not, believe it. I don't know. So that's the Close Encounters abduction experiencer segment. Then they move on to the Oumuamua case, which was interesting. And actually this segment made me respect Avi Loeb more. I was always on the fence about Avi Loeb. Is he an agent of so-called deep state? Is he compromised? Is he, I don't know. But after watching this, I'm kind of thinking he's genuine a little bit more now. One thing, first bullet point, why do they always show Oumuamua as a rock? And if you don't know what Oumuamua is, Avi Loeb noticed something coming in from outside our solar system, apparently the first object to ever come from outside the solar system into it. And he noticed that some type of mysterious force was pushing it, and it sped up in an unnatural way. So he looked at everything it could possibly be, ruled out everything, and then went with the hypothesis that it could be artificial and a spacecraft of an intelligent civilization. And he faced a lot of hostility and pushback. And what's interesting on the second bullet point and the sub-bullet point, him and Sean Kirkpatrick, who was the head of ARO, originally had a paper together. And they said, and they were hypothesizing that Oumuamua was a mother craft that was sending out probes. And they were going to publish this. It didn't get published, but it got leaked. So makes you think, was that part of a disclosure agenda? Were they doing genuine science? Kirkpatrick and Loeb? Interesting. But anyway, the third bullet point. Loeb says he was personally and professionally attacked for months and years following, when it came out, it just got worse and worse. He said it intensified. He says science is hostile to UFOs. He says, quote, they're trying to step on every flower that rises above the grass. And I kind of, if you listen to Loeb during this segment, it seems like he's really upset about it, and he seems really genuine. And then you have Gary Nolan in the second to last bullet point here. Funny clip. He says, Neil deGrasse Tyson needs to grow up. And he says, these people should be forced to give back their PhDs. Because, of course, deGrasse Tyson is ridiculing it. And on my last bullet point here, thinking, zooming out a bit and reading between the lines, why is the documentary so pro Oumuamua? They make it seem like it's real and all poor Avi Loeb and, we should be taking this seriously. Maybe because it supports the potential alien threat narrative. right, that they might want to have a hold on to keep people in a fear-based paradigm. Because if that gets confirmed, yeah, there's a mothership that came into our solar system and it's sending out probes. Like, you can ride the fear base, you can ride the need for Space Force and military funding. So maybe that's what this is all about. They end this part 2 with a very dramatic Corbell scene, Jeremy Corbell, and painting him kind of as the hero. And, he says he's been threatened, but he says, quote, what are they going to do? And I think we can question this confidence. Is he being protected? Is there a possible deal where, he just has to stay within a certain line and he can keep doing what he's doing with impunity and, maybe get some goodies like the videos and the spotlight, maybe, who knows, total speculation. But you do have to question, why would he be so confident? Like, nobody can touch me, and that's what he kind of really expresses in the documentary. Second bullet point that shows him like getting emotional and like breaking down and crying. Now, this is totally subjective. But just like I felt that the Oprah guy that I mentioned before, when I watched him, it seemed very sincere. When I watched Jeremy Corbell, where he's like about to cry, to me, it just felt not genuine. It felt like it was acting. And again, I'm not saying that that's true, but we do have intuition. Another thing we've been brainwashed out of is thinking that intuition is not a real thing. And we can develop an intuition. And my intuition tell me that he was not being sincere in this whole crying thing because he's been threatened. I don't know. Maybe on the last bullet point, it's something more prosaic. Maybe the producers just wanted to have this kind of hero theme in the documentary for production aesthetics. But anyway, we move on to the last part 3, called The Possibilities. And here's my observations from part 3. They're kind of flirting with this idea of man-made UFOs, but also denying them. They're like towing this line. The episode starts off with Corbell on speakerphone with an intelligence officer, and he asks him, do you think there could be a secret group that we don't know about that has these UFOs? And the guy's answer is vague and inconclusive. He says, quote, it's not us now, maybe from another dimension. What does that mean? First of all, us is an ambiguous term. What do we mean by us, right? It's not the U.S. government. Is it human beings? The idea is that it's a secretive group, a cabal, through industry, military, and government that has this technology and is doing who knows what with it. So us is not really a useful term. The second sub-bullet point, he says, quote, every time higher-ups are asked questions, they make an excuse. And I think this is telling. Why, if this intelligence officer is real, why would the high-up officers just be making up an excuse? What are they trying to keep secret? That there's things flying that they don't know? Or that there's ET? Like, why would that be such a secret? It would make sense if it was something even deeper that was being kept secret. So something to think about. Then you have the woman on the bottom left there, Kelly Chase, and she makes a comment saying that it's possible that there's man-made UFOs, and then they follow that up right with Corbell saying no, and says, for the longest time I wanted to believe it. So again, they're playing that line, and Corbell is clearly taking that line that there's not man-made UFOs. And even on the last sub-point here, Kelly Chase, she actually, interestingly, mentions the possibility of an alien false flag staging by the powers that be. So interesting that they dropped that in there, and I think a good sign, really. And then onto this point again, they show a clip from the hearing where one of the congressmen asked Grusch, do we have advanced technology that's being kept secret? And Grusch says, there are advances in space and aerospace tech that are out of the purview of government. What does that mean? What kind of technology? UFOs? What else? And then it goes again. It goes right back to Corbell, and Corbell says, we have some, but we're trying to figure it out. So again, going that back and forth there. Why? Right? Maybe it's a good sign. Maybe that truth is going to come out. Maybe that's delayed for further. Or who knows? Maybe they're going to try to keep that secret. But I think the fact that they mentioned it here is a good sign. They talk about USOs and underground bases. George Knapp says that he's talked to intelligence officers that are, quote, convinced there are NHI bases deep under the ocean. They show a USO video. Gary Nolan comments that on the scientific viability of ETs establishing underground bases. So interesting. They're kind of planting that seed there. Maybe that's one of the things that will come out early on. And then they move on to theories as who they are and why they're here. This I thought was one of the weakest points of the documentary, and it kind of segues into the fear-based part of the documentary. So Gary Nolan says they've been here a long time. Kind of a cool quote where he says 100% probability that NHI exists. Richard Dolan and George Knapp share evidence that there's human-looking aliens among us. They talk about the humans from the future narrative, which I think could be part of it, but I don't think that would explain it all. Then you have Corbell's entertainment theory that they're just here because we're so fascinating to watch, like a entertainment venue. I'm not buying that, and I don't think that we're really that fascinating. Especially that wouldn't make sense, especially if they're so advanced and on another level of reality. Maybe that is why some come here, but I don't know. The gorilla in a zoo theory, which is that they're trying to make sure we don't destroy the planet and the solar system. That actually makes sense. And then some people saying that they're maybe doing military scouting, which I don't think that makes sense. Because if they're so advanced, they wouldn't need to scout us out. They'd be so advanced. Their intelligence gathering would be so advanced that they could just get rid of us like that without needing this decades long or however long scouting. So that doesn't make sense to me. But that bridges into this segment where they have this fear part. And this is towards the end of episode 3. So it's interesting placement here. What's impression's going to be left in the viewer's mind. And they go with this dark reality, which is this a little preparation for the false flag alien invasion? Maybe. George Knapp says, quote, "This could be darker than we could imagine." And again, George Knapp saying, we don't know where we are on the, quote, pecking order of the cosmic food chain. Now, I believe that's a very Darwinian and competitive way of looking at it, which is a limited way of perceiving that, interpreting that. And to my sub-bullet point here, why do we have to think about it as a pecking order and this kind of competitive Darwinian system? Why can't we think about it in a way of how it may help us realize our vast potential and our connection with something greater? Both are equally valid, but we go with that fear-based, we go with that Darwinian model because we've been conditioned to function that way mentally. And then to my last point, they bring up the history of the UFO intervention at nuclear sites, and they present it as threatening, when if you look at it, it looks like it's just us. It's neutral at worst, and just shutting them down so we don't destroy things and the planet or parts of it. And in a positive sense, it's even helping us. But they present it as threatening with no alternative viewpoints, which I think is telling. And then they have a segment with Bob Lazar. Just a little side note, pretty significant. Lazar says he would testify under oath. So everyone that's been saying he's been a liar all these years, well, he said he'd go under oath. And that would be something really easy to check on. Did he work at S4? Did he do this, And if the Congress, the government would investigate that. And if they found it was false, he's going to jail. So maybe Bob Lazar has a chance to vindicate himself. What we would have to be careful of, my second bullet point, is that if he becomes a witness that goes on the stand, that could be used for limited disclosure. Because remember, Bob Lazar's story is that we didn't get anywhere with reverse engineering. But I don't think that that's going to be the case, because in my sub-bullet point there, Burchett, just the other day, said that they have a list of witnesses and that they are not going to say who they are, because last time that happened, they were all threatened and intimidated and they didn't show up. So he said they're keeping this new list of high-quality witnesses secret until the next hearing. And now, to the last point here, I see a connection because a couple of weeks ago, Stephen Greer, the Disclosure Project, he did an interview just kind of updating on what the Disclosure Project's doing, and he said that they gave Congress, the UAP caucus, Burchett, Luna, all them, he said the Disclosure Project gave them a list of 23 or 21 witnesses for the next hearing. So if you put 2 and 2 together, it seems like that's who Burchett's talking about. And in that case, that could be really good news because we know the kind of witnesses that Stephen Greer at least says he's trying to bring out, the ones who are going to help bring out the full, real truth about this and not potentially a limited hangout type of disclosure from a witness like Bob Lazar. And in wrapping up here, I mentioned this in my last video about analyzing if Jeremy Corbell may be a knowing or unknowing asset of a limited disclosure psychological operation. And to me, the logical invalidity of his statement here, where he says that these intelligence community insiders, CIA, whoever, come to him to get advice on how they can safely convey information. And to me, that just seems far-fetched, because if you're a trained intelligence operative with experience, with a network of your own, and you have access to some of this most secret information in the world, you're really going to go to Jeremy Corbell to be like, hey man, what's the best way for me to get this out there? I would hope you would know how to do that. That's literally your expertise and your elite position in a certain organization, is to know how to move intelligence safely. So it makes no sense to me and raises my red flag. And I go into a little more depth about that in my last video. And to round it out here, we have some voices of reason. Richard Dolan saying, quote, "For a century we have been living a foundational lie." Dolan again, quote, "The truth is not always psychologically reassuring," right? I hope helping people realize, we should want the truth. It's not going to always fit into what we would like to believe is true. And we got to kind of come to terms with that. He uses this burning house analogy. Do you want to be living on a beach, with a daiquiri looking at a sunny day in the ocean when that's just a dream, and then your home is burning? Or do you want to go deal with your house that's burning and come to terms with that? So interesting analogy. Third bullet point, Burchett says, the only way the full truth of this is going to come out is if someone, quote, someone from one of these labs comes out with hard evidence before they, quote, commit suicide. And he makes a good point, until we get, and I agree, until we get that hard evidence, the so-called powers that be can just keep pushing this off, can just keep delaying it because it's still just witness testimony. And so we need someone to come out. And as Burchett alludes to, these people are risking their lives by doing so. And then Gary Nolan has a great little clip there talking about the Schumer Amendment and the UAP disclosure bill. That bill passed unanimously in the Senate. Do you think that the Senate, with an upcoming election, the Senate's Democrat majority, with the election coming up, do you think they will put something out there that's such a taboo, stigmatized, ridiculed subject as UFOs and aliens? Do you think they would make a bill and pass it unanimously that has the word non-human intelligence in it dozens of times if there wasn't something real to it? And yeah, he says, what more proof do you need? Read the tea leaves, he says. So, and I agree. That's very telling. And people just won't come to terms with that. That would make no sense for Chuck Schumer and the Senate to pass a bill with such language if they were not aware of what was going on. And we know that the 40 witnesses from David Grusch and others from the Disclosure Project, we know that they have gone into SCIFs, secured classified information facilities, and told top secret testimony to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Marco Rubio has said, people have told me things that are shocking. So they know. Those are the people that know, at least know what the witnesses know, the Senate Intelligence Committee. And so, yes, we got to think about all this, man. There's something very real to this. And, in conclusion, I think that this documentary was a solid facts-based recap of the story of the last few years and the issue overall. So I do think it's good. Overall, I think this is positive. It can help people get acclimated to this. I think it will do that. The Nazca mummy ridicule was an outlier to me. There was something about that stuck out. Like, why are they debunking and ridiculing it so much? I think it's to postpone that part of the disclosure, that they've been around since ancient times. Fourth bullet point, I think when we read between lines, we see that the alien threat card is still on the table, meaning they have the fear-based element in this, and maybe if they still want to play that alien threat card to use it for whatever agenda, get the public in fear, get more funding for the military, that's still on the table with this documentary, as well as a limited disclosure, saying, yes, UFOs exist, aliens exist, but we have no idea how to comprehend it. That type of a disclosure versus what might be the deeper truth is, yes, there's a whole other thing going on, like what Mike Herrera talks about. And to my last bullet point here, I think, good documentary, and what's really going to be the next shifting point is the next hearing. The next hearing and the witnesses should reveal a lot. I do think so. I think it's going to take it to that next level. We see that the Congress members came out of the recent classified briefing. Burchett said everyone walked out of there realizing that Grusch was legit and his claims were legit. So this hearing's got to do something. It's got to move the needle forward, I think, significantly. So we'll see. And here are some of the sources if you want to check them out yourself. And, of course, watch the documentary yourself. It's worth taking in and seeing how this is being presented to the public. And thank you for watching. If you found this valuable, please hit the like button and subscribe, just so that YouTube will show it to more people, and perhaps more people it will help some people analyze the documentary and kind of read between the lines instead of just passively taking it in, which is what I believe the media powers want, is just passive absorption. And I think that the clips that are chosen, the narrative that is selected, I don't think it's just random. I do think that there's a reason for it all. And so we need to be educated. We need to be critical thinkers. Otherwise, we're going to be controlled on what we think about this topic, which I think is going to completely change our world. Could, and maybe won't, if things get suppressed and we get a kind of a limited disclosure. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.